Welcome, welcome. Merry Christmas. It is just 1 week away now from Christmas Eve. It's a wonderful time of year. We are just so excited. I hope you and your family are just excited and getting ready. It's a joyful time of year. In reality, if I were to say like, hey, what is the most joyful moment of the entire year? I think the vast majority of us would say that the most joyful moment of the entire year is Christmas morning, right? Especially if you're like me and we have small kids in our family, and there's just so much joy and anticipation and excitement that builds up into that time, and we're just so excited. And yet, though, if I were to be honest, and I think if you were to be too, even though it's the most joyful, wonderful moment of the year, I don't think we would want to do it more than once a year, right? Like, let's just be honest. Like, could you imagine if, like, in 2024, we were just like, hey, let's instead have Christmas, like, every day of the year? Like, how awful that would be, right? That 5 pounds that you gained over the holidays would be 50 pounds. It would not be healthy, right? You would also be like all those cousins and aunts and uncles that you love seeing once a year wouldn't go home. You would have to see them every day. Like, that's not a joyful thing. And don't get me started on, like, we'd have to listen to Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas, every single day. Like, could you imagine the misery with all of that here? So even though it's the most joyful time is what we say, we really wouldn't actually want to experience it every single day, which leads me to believe that much of what we define as being joyful around Christmas time isn't actually really joy, it's happiness. And there's a big difference between being happy and being joyful. See, happiness is actually built off that word happenstance. And so basically, if things that happen to you that are good that day, then you're going to be happy. If things happen to you that are bad that day, then you're not going to be happy. You're going to be angry instead. And that's often how we define joy, is really just happiness on if we happen to have a good day that day. But as Christians, we have access into something that is so much greater than mere happiness. We have access into joy. And joy goes down so much deeper than a surface level happiness can ever touch here. Joy goes down so deep here that, in all honesty, it's not even from ourselves. Joy is going to be a gift from somebody else. It's going to be ultimately a gift from the Lord and the Lord alone. For instance here, this is probably going to happen next Monday on Christmas morning, that some of the moms are going to do this trick here on Christmas morning. Here's what's going to happen. We're all going to be opening up presents on Christmas morning. Everybody's going to open all the presents there. And then after all the presents have been opened, we're going to notice that there's another gift behind the tree, right? And we're going to say, hey, whose gift is that? There's not even a name tag on that gift. Whose gift is that? And then mom's going to say, oh, that's for me. And we're going to say, how do you know it's for you? Because I bought it myself. Nobody else was going to buy that for me, so I had to buy it myself. I know some of you moms are going to do that trick, right? And I'm not saying you don't deserve it. Like, by all means, you deserve it, moms. But here's the deal. That's not a gift. If you had to buy it yourself, if you had to pay for it yourself, if you had to wrap it yourself, if you had to earn it yourself, then that's ultimately not a gift, because a gift is something that is unearned. An unearned favor, an unearned thing that you didn't pay for, you didn't earn, but rather it was given to you even though you didn't have anything. And that's ultimately what joy is, even so much so, before I get into the passage today. So in the New Testament, there's a few Greek words that speak of gift here. And one of them is actually char. C-H-A-R. Char is how you pronounce it, at least. And it means to bestow favor. That's what it means to give a gift, to bestow favor on somebody here. But then if you look at the word joy is actually kara, where we get the word Kara, the lady's name here. Kara means joy. Kara means joy. And did you notice how similar those words were? Meaning this, that joy, by very definition, is a gift. You didn't do it yourself. You can't manipulate your own joy. You can manipulate your happiness, right? You can say, I'm going to have a good day today. I'm going to get my favorite coffee on my way into work. I'm going to get off early. I'm going to take a vacation. Like, you can manipulate your happiness in this brief moment, but you can't manipulate your joy has to come from somebody else. By very definition, it's a gift. Another word, I don't have it up here, but another word that also comes from that is charis, which means grace. And so just like the grace of God was not something that you could ever earn, by definition, grace is given to you, joy in the same way is going to be given to you. So if we can't manipulate it, then how can we actually live a joyful life? How can we actually live? And well, the main point of this passage here, the main point of my sermon here is this, is that when God is your everything, you will find everlasting joy. When God is your everything. And so if we're chasing after all these things that make us temporarily happy in this moment, then ultimately it's going to leave us empty. But the moment we say, you know what, I'm going to build my entire life about pursuing God, the joy giver, then I can find that everlasting joy because it is a gift from him. All right, so we're going to be in Psalms chapter 16 today. Psalm 16, starting in verse 1 here. And it says, "Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge." So this is David, King David speaking now, and he starts out by saying, preserve me. That word preserve is to watch over me, to look after me here, to make sure I'm safe. And so this would be almost like, I don't know if you've ever talked to a mom of young kids, and while you're talking to them, they are very good at multitasking, so they always have one eye on that child that's doing something here, and they're still good at like responding, but halfway through the conversation, that mom's like, hey, Jimmy, put the dirt down, right? It's like they were watching over that. Men, I don't have that skill, right? Like halfway through a 30-minute conversation, I'm like, oh no, I'm a father. Like, where's my kids, right? Like, we don't have that. But ladies, you are able to watch over and preserve and make sure that they are safe. That's the same idea here, that God is saying, I'm going to keep them safe. I'm going to keep them secure. I'm watching over them. And here's the reason why. For in you, I take refuge. David is saying, I run to you. When you seek refuge from somebody, it means then that there is no safety out there. There is no home out there. There's no security out there. So you have to run to a place of refuge here. And if you are running to a place of refuge, typically you're not going to be in a joyful situation, right? Like if this storm was actually done in August here and it would have been a major hurricane that would have just hit us or something like that, and we'd have to take refuge, if we'd have to flee, we would not be feeling very joyful as we are running out of that. But the moment that we find security, the moment that we know that our house is okay and everything's all right, then at that point we can have joy because we have found security. And he's saying, I have found that in the Lord and the Lord alone. Preserve me. Keep watch over me because I'm going to find all my safety in you. And then he goes on to say in verse 2, he says, I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. And we almost say, okay, David, that was a little bit redundant here in this little psalm of yours. But there's actually more going on in the Hebrew than meets the eye initially. And the English versions kind of give you a little hints on this. For instance, notice the first Lord here is in all capital letters. Whenever you see that in most English translations, it's actually the name Yahweh, his covenantal, his personal name here. It means that he is the creator over all of the universe here. And so he's saying, I'm saying to the Lord, Yahweh, that you are my Lord. And notice now it's Lord. It's only the first letter is capitalized. And in Hebrew, that's the word Adonai, which means master. So what he's saying here is, I'm saying to the God of the universe, the creator over everything, that you're also my master, that I'm going to listen to you, that I'm going to obey you, that you are not just the one who created it, but personally, I am going to obey you as well. And then he says, because I have no good apart from you. And I'm convinced that we need to underline this. We need to circle this line. We need to memorize this and tell it to ourselves day after day after day after day that we have no good apart from God. Because in American Christianity especially, it feels like that we know that, like, yeah, God is important in my life. That he's an important person in my life, and he kind of fits nicely on Sunday mornings, and I'm going to honor him with a little bit of my money and all of that, but then he kind of fits nicely in everything. But then I also have my job, and I work really hard on my job, but that's kind of my thing. I earned that, right? And then we have our family, and hopefully our kids turn out, but it's really my spouse and I's thing, and we're going through a struggle, but that's all my stuff. But in reality, there is no good. There's nothing good in your life that God didn't have something to do with. The Bible, New Testament actually says every good and perfect gift comes from the Father above, right? And so if it is something good in your life, then it is the Lord that did it. It's not you that did it. Don't give yourself that type of credit. It was only God that was working. Why? Because joy is a gift that he gives. Now, he's going to give that gift in several different ways, and he bestows that on us. He fleshes that out in many different ways, and for the rest of this Psalms here, we get to look at all the different ways now that he gives his people joy. And so in verse 3, he says, the first way that he gives us joy, he says, as for the saints in the land, they are the excellent ones, in whom is all my delight. And we might say, okay, who's the saints in the land? Like, what is that even talking about? That just is a reference to the believers. That's a reference to you and me that actually believe in Jesus Christ. He's saying that one of the ways that the Lord gives joy to his people is that he says, you have a church. You have other believers, and that is where you find all your delight, all your joy. And I get it. Like, this might not have been the gift that you were hoping for, right? I think for every single one of us, it happens, just at a different age. But I remember I was probably about 12 years old or something, and I realized at the 12-year-old Christmas time that I was no longer a child, and I no longer got children gift. And it's a sad, sad day when that comes. Like, maybe you remember it. Like, early on in your life here as a kid, you get all these toys and basketballs, and maybe if you're younger, you got video games, and you got all these wonderful things for Christmas, and it's always so exciting. And then one day it switches. One day you start getting that adult gift there, and I just remember even as like 12 years old, I was like so excited. I was waiting to see what was I going to get. And I just remember like going downstairs, opening up my first gift, and it was socks, right? And it was like, this isn't really what I wanted. This is not going to bring me the joy. Now, here's the deal though, like flash forward a few years, like if you're over 30 and you get a good pair of socks, you're like, yes, right? It's like my circulation's not great. I'm putting these bad boys on right now. Like it's just a good day if you get a good pair of socks, right? But that only came with what? Maturity in your life that saw now that this was actually something that could even give you joy then. And in the same way, we look at this and we say, wait. The thing that's supposed to give me joy is the church. Like I was hoping for a bag of money, right? Like I wasn't hoping. In fact, many of us came in here today and say, you know what? No, actually, people in this church, they hurt me. They said bad things about me. I don't want anything to do with the church at all. But this is the very gift that God gives us. And maybe it's as we mature, we start to see then that what is going to bring you joy is learning to understand and forgive the people that have hurt you. Maybe what's going to bring you joy is to get your eyes off of yourself and your own selfish desires for once in your life and actually come in and serve other people and make your life not about you anymore. But if you want to actually live joyfully, then you're going to start to serve all the other people that God loves. If God loves this church enough to die for it, then why don't we love it enough to serve it? And that's how we start to live joyfully in our life, is we stop making our life all about us, and we start to make our life about other people instead here. And so the very first point in your bulletin, the way that God gives us joy here, is that every gift from God brings joy, and his people give us joy. You will not live a joyful life if you're not connected in a community of God. You just won't, because that just means your whole entire life is centered around you. So get your eyes off of yourself and start to be a part of this community. This is a gift. It might feel like socks for a minute here, but the moment that you start to see this is a wonderful and joyful thing that the Lord has given me. But then on the opposite side of that, verse 4 says, the sorrows of those who run after another God shall multiply. The sorrows of those who run after another God shall multiply here. And so now it shows if you're not actually going to be pursuing after God's people, you're going to have other gods that you're going to be pursuing after now. Those other gods that you might be pursuing after, I don't think it's probably Islam or Buddhism or any of that type of things here. For most of us, it's actually going to be that next promotion is our God, right? The next raise is our God. For some of us, it's going to have the perfect Instagram family and make sure that all of our friends are jealous about how good our Christmas pictures were taken here. And we just pursue after all of these other things here. And if we pursue after all those things, it is just going to make our sorrows multiply. And we see this so often, even over Thanksgiving. We actually flew into Dallas and spent a little bit of time in Dallas. And I went to one of my favorite places, actually, the Dallas Cowboys facility, right? Because I have to bribe my kids to like the same teams as me. And we went to the gift shop there, and I told them, I was like, hey, you can get one thing while we're here before we move on here. And so they were going around, and one of my little boys, he actually went to the back of the store where there's this glass encased for all the high items, high price items there, all the autographed areas. And I'm like, you are in the wrong spot, buddy. Like, I was looking for a keychain. And but he's just looking at it, and there's actually another customer that's standing right beside us, and this other customer is about ready to buy one of these high-priced items, and so the worker is kind of moving things around, trying to get this item out here, and my little boy sees a helmet there, and this helmet is $1,600 because it's signed by the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys. $1,600 helmet, and this guy is about ready to buy the one right beside it, and he looks at it, and my little boy says, hey, somebody scribbled on that one. And then there's this man that's about ready to spend $1,000 on something that somebody scribbled on. And I was like, man, he gets it. Like, my little boy gets it better than the other guy. And there's nothing wrong to have hobbies. There's nothing wrong to collect things. But when you start to chase after all of these frivolous things, then what is going to happen in your life is going to make the sorrows multiply. It's going to make the sorrows multiply, and that's what happens in our life. Because what happens, what's even worse than getting socks on Christmas morning? If you got excited and you woke up and you went downstairs and you were so excited that you opened up the box and there was nothing there. It's like, what? I was chasing after that promotion. What do you mean it didn't bring me happiness? I was chasing after that girl. I know she wasn't a Christian. I was chasing after that relationship. I was chasing after all of these things, thinking that that was going to bring me joy and happiness, and then it just left me empty, didn't it? And that what happens every single time here. We start to chase after all of these other gods, all of these other idols here, and we think that it's going to bring us joy, but it leaves us empty instead. And so he says, don't do that. He says, their drink offerings of blood I will not pour out or take their names on my lips, basically saying, I'm not going to sacrifice to them. I'm not going to sing their praises. I'm only going to reserve that for the Lord. Verse 5 goes on to say, the Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. And so he kind of paints a picture, and follow me with it. On Christmas morning or Christmas afternoon, probably a week from tomorrow, right? We're all gonna probably hopefully get with family, and we're gonna have a big Christmas dinner, right? And I know for Thanksgiving we all kind of eat the same things. For Christmas, there's a little bit more individuality in it. Like my family, we eat steak because that's what Jesus wants us to. All right. But I don't know what you eat here, but you might have steak, and you have all the pies and the good fixins, and you have mashed potatoes and everything that's going to make that meal just utterly delicious here. But you know what happens if a little child walks up to that might have been the greatest meal that could have possibly been imagined for the entire year? What happens when a little child walks down? He's probably like, "Where's the nuggets?" It's like, really? You look for that whole thing and you're looking for that, but here's the picture that he's painting right now. Think of it now. Instead of being an actual meal, you sit down at a table, and on that table is everything that the world has to offer you, right? There's fame and fortune over here. There's a little side of good looks over here. There's wealth right in front of you, and you start to look and pan over all those things that you could want here, and surely you'd want them all, but instead of that, you'd look over and say, I'll take the Lord. That's my cup. That's my portion. That is what I want more than anything else in this life here. I want the Lord here. He is my portion. He is my cup. He is all that I want. You hold my lot. He's saying, you are the one in charge of it when all the dice has been rolling here. It's not random chance that happens in my life. It's not happenstance that I hope I get happy. It's the Lord, because joy is a gift and God is the gift giver. He's the one in charge of that. You will not find joy if you're not first finding the Lord. And he goes on to say, verse 6, the lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Indeed, I have a beautiful inheritance here. Now, this is King David speaking, and we kind of think that this psalm was written right as he was being anointed as king, and he was looking forward to being king someday. And so certainly for him, his beautiful inheritance in pleasant places probably was in a reference to one day him being a king over all this land here. But for us as well, we're not going to inherit land or anything like that, but still this verse applies, because in pleasant places, that's actually just the same word that's going to be translated as pleasures later on in this passage here. So he's saying that there have been lines that have been drawn, and they've been drawn for my pleasure. They've been drawn for my pleasure. Now, sometimes whenever there's lines drawn, it doesn't feel very pleasurable, right? For instance, my children, whenever they go outside and play, I frequently will tell them, like, hey, just stay away from the road, right? You can play anywhere in the yard. You can go outside. You can do whatever you want. Just stay away from the road. It's not safe there. I've drawn that line, but I remember over a couple weeks ago, we had our cousins over, and they were playing out in the yard. It's a big yard, and after a while, it got a little too quiet, and every parent knows when it's a little too quiet, you better go check on the kids. And, like, we walked outside, and as we walked outside, all the kids now are in the ditch right beside the road playing, and then there's a couple of the kids that are now laying spread eagle in the middle of the road. And we're like, what are you doing? Like, this was the one thing that we said you could not do. Why are you out there? So we're like pulling them away. And you know what they thought in that moment? They thought that we were just some cruel parents that were restricting their joy, restricting their pleasure, but as we were pulling them out of the road. And sometimes we get in the exact same situation as adults where we say, you know what? I know that the Lord doesn't want me in this relationship with this unbeliever, but they make me so happy, right? I know that the Lord has certain rules for my finances, but I don't have time for that. I'm saving up for a boat, right? Like we go all in on something here, and it feels like the Lord is now restricting our happiness, restricting our joy, when in fact those lines were there to give us more joy. Because I know if those kids get hit by a car, it is not a joyful day, it is not a joyful life. So I was more interested in my children's joy than they were. They just didn't even know it yet. And in the same way, God is more invested in your joy than you are. You and I, we get so consumed with the happiness of our life, of feeling good in this moment. But God says, yeah, you can feel good for this moment, but I know where that will lead to. Your sorrows will multiply. Instead, He is after the joy. And that joy can't be found in any of those circumstances. It can only be found in the Lord. Because it says, I have a beautiful inheritance. A beautiful inheritance. And so for us, though, like, what is that talking about? But per the context, what did the previous verse say that David wanted? What was his portion? It was the Lord, right? The thing that he wanted wasn't just material possessions. It was that the Lord is my cup. The Lord is my portion. I want more of the Lord. And so this beautiful inheritance for you and I is just more of the Lord Himself. And that's the next point here, that the Lord gives joy. Every gift is joy. And our inheritance is more of the joy giver. It's more the joy giver. It's not just things that might make us happy for a day or two, but we have an inheritance, and that inheritance is we get to actually be with the Father, be with the one who loves us, who gives us all of this joy. Verse 7 goes on to say, I bless the Lord. I bless the Lord always, who gives me counsel. In the night also my heart instructs me. So he's now blessing the Lord. Why? Because the Lord gives him counsel. The Lord gives him wisdom. The Lord helps direct his path. Now, there's several ways for which the Lord does it. Number one, the most common way is read your Bible. That's how the Lord gives us counsel. Oftentimes we say, I feel like the Lord's not speaking to me. Have you opened up your Bible? Like He wrote you an entire book. So don't say the Lord isn't speaking if you haven't actually read your Bible. This is the primary way in which the Lord is going to give us counsel here. And so we bless Him. Why? Because in these pages here, it might feel like there's some lines, it might feel like there's some restrictions, but in those lines is actually joy itself here. He says, in the night also my heart instructs me. And he's talking about when you lay down in bed and you're in the Holy Spirit is going to guide and direct you even still. There's been so many times in my life where I don't know what to do. And then in that moment, then in the quietness, the Lord reveals that to me. It's like, that didn't come from me. That I didn't have that myself. It was all from the Lord here. So verse 8 says, I have set the Lord always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I shall not be shaken. And so now he says that the Lord is always before me. And what he's saying is the Lord is always at the front of my mind. I'm always quick to think of him. I'm always quick to look to him in every single moment here. The Lord is at my right hand as well. And so he's not talking physically about this, but he's saying that the right hand is the seat of power. It's the one where all my power and all the might comes from. It's actually not from me. It's from the Lord. So I will not be shaken. I'll not be shaken. Even though this world is crazy, even though I don't know what to expect tomorrow, even though all of the life is getting out of hand, I won't be shaken. And because of that, I can have joy. I can have joy. It's not based on my circumstances, but it's because I'm with the Lord. And so even now, his counsel, his word, all leads us back into joy. And that's the next point, is that every gift from God brings joy, and his counsel leads us into that joy. So don't run away from that. Run towards it. Run towards the one who gives you these good things. And as we come back now to the last little portion, verse 9 and following, he says, therefore, my heart is glad. My whole being rejoices. My flesh also dwells secure. When's the last time you said something like that? Like, my heart is glad. Like, every part of me is happy. Every part of me is glad. My whole being rejoices. Like, even the flesh dwells. Like, even my body feels like most of the time for me, it's like, man, my heart is glad, but my back hurts, right? Like, there's very few times in my life where I'm just like, every part of me, this is just perfect in every single way. And yet that is where David's at now. Why? Because he will not be shaken. Why? Because the Lord gave him counsel. Why? Because he has a good inheritance, and the Lord is his cup and his portion. All of those things come together, and that makes his heart glad. He rejoices. Even his body itself is secure, it says. Verse 10 says, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol. Now, Sheol is a Hebrew word that means grave, and it can mean hell in some context, but I think it's just talking about a grave now. He said, you're not going to just leave my soul down in the grave, or let the Holy One see corruption. You're not going to let my body see destruction and see corruption. Basically, it's like, you're not going to let me die down there. You're going to be watching over me. You're going to have a good path for me, because in verse 11 he says, you make known to me the path of life. So instead of finding the grave down in Sheol, he says, I have found the path of life, and you alone. In your presence there's fullness of joy. At the right hand are pleasures forevermore. That we can find a path to life. We will not find the grave, because I found that probably one of the most, the thing that steals joy the quickest is when you die, right? Dead people aren't happy. And yet here he's saying that I'm not actually going to face that. I'm not going to face that death. I'm not going to face Sheol, the grave. I'm not going to face corruption. Instead, I'm going to find the path of life where there is fullness of joy, because I am with the Father. And so now we see this last point in your bulletin, is that every good gift from God brings joy, and our everlasting life promises joy forever. But if I can be a little bit of a downer for a moment, who was this psalm written by again? Do you remember who I said? David. Not to spoil anything for you, but I know that David just said that he's going to not see the grave, and that he's going to have joy forevermore, and it's going to be a wonderful thing. But not to spoil it, but David is dead, right? He's actually been dead for a long time, like 3,000 years. Like, you can't find his body. His body has seen corruption now, because we look at this passage and we say, yeah, that's all nice and good. And David is saying all these wonderful things, that he's not going to die, and he's not going to see his body corrupted, and he's going to have joy forevermore in life and all of that. But in reality, David died. And you might even be looking at this passage and say, yeah, well, preacher, I get it. It's Christmas time. You're preaching on joy. But if you knew the year that I had, like, I want to believe everything you just said. I want to believe Psalm 16 is true. But in my life, I've been trying to follow him, and there's been no joy whatsoever. All those things you said promised joy has just brought more and more heartache here. It doesn't seem very true. I think it's because when David was talking about this joy, he wasn't simply talking about himself. He wasn't. How do we know that? Maybe you've picked up on what I've been doing these last few weeks, but every single psalm that we've been looking at has a reference over to the New Testament, has implications to the New Testament, and this one included. In fact, this passage, Psalm 16, shows up at one of the most pivotal moments in the entire New Testament here. If you remember here, Jesus comes on the scene, but then he gets crucified, but he's risen up again. Then he ascends up into heaven. But then after that, 50 days later, there's a day called Pentecost. And at that moment, then Peter gets up and he starts to preach one of the most famous and one of the most impactful sermons the world has ever seen. And as he starts to preach this sermon here, he actually starts to quote several passages from the Old Testament that led up to that moment of the New Testament here. And he actually quotes this passage in Acts chapter 2. So in Acts chapter 2, he quotes it, but then let me just pick up where he leaves off. So in Acts 2, starting in verse 29, after he quotes this passage, he says, "Brothers, I may say to you with confidence about the patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us to this day." You know what that means? Peter's like, hey, guys, you and I both know David is dead. He said he was going to find life. He said he was going to find joy, but instead he found the grave like everyone else here. So what is Psalm 16 actually talking about? Verse 30 says, "Being therefore a prophet, and knowing that God has sworn with an oath to him that he would set one of his descendants on his throne, he foresaw and spoke about the resurrection of Christ, and that he was not abandoned to Hades," which is another name for Sheol, "nor did his flesh see corruption. This Jesus God raised up, and of that we are all witnesses. Being therefore exalted at the right hand of God, and having received from the Father the promise of the Holy Spirit, he has poured out this that you yourselves are seeing and hearing." And so if I lost you, let me catch you up now. Peter gets up here and says, when David said that one day that he was not going to see death, he was not talking about himself. He was talking about Jesus on the cross in the resurrection. And I know it's Christmas time and we're supposed to be talking about baby Jesus, but guess what? Even Christmas is about the cross of Jesus Christ. Because what is going to bring you joy? Yes, a little child brings joy, but there's been lots of little children that have been born, right? Children are born every single day. The only thing that probably would bring us more joy than a little child being born is when a dead man comes back to life. And that's where our joy as Christians is rooted down deep. It is in the fact of this, that Jesus Christ is raised up again. And as long as Jesus is still alive, you and I can have joy. Because that's not changing. All the other circumstances in our life is going to change. It's going to be shaken. But there is a solid rock that Jesus Christ has walked out of that grave. And as he has walked out of that grave, and as he is still living today, our joy is rooted in that and that alone. It is something that we could not manipulate ourselves. It's something we couldn't formulate ourselves. It's a gift from God and God alone. And so that's where our joy comes from. But then the question is like, okay, how do we get that joy, right? If it's not something that I can manufacture myself, if I can't formulate and just try to work it all myself and work it out here, like how do I get the joy from the Lord? I think we need to start to draw close to the joy giver. I saw this, even a little taste of it earlier this week. My parents surprised my children. We knew they were coming, but we didn't tell my children that their grandparents were coming here. We just let them answer the door. Watch this video of how my little boys react.
The door, see who's here.
Oh, you're so here. What's he doing?
He's currently running in circles right now. There is a level of joy in Micah as he sees his grandparents. You're going to see that too for some of us. You know, oftentimes on Fridays are my day off. And I really try to make it all about my family on that day. So you probably aren't going to see me on Fridays very often. And often on Thursday nights, I'll go to my children and I'll say like, hey buddies, what do you want to do tomorrow? Like, we can go to the park, we can watch a movie. Like, what do you want to do? What do you want to eat? And we try to just make a special day on Thursday nights. And thankfully, my children are still small enough here that they give sweet answers, because they come back here. And, after I say, hey, what do you want to do? You can do anything that you want tomorrow. What do you want to do? They say, we want to play with Daddy. And I think they know that at this moment in their life, that I'm the one and their mother that is able to give them a certain level of happiness, right? Because every time that we go out somewhere, it's mommy and daddy that's driving them. Every time that we do something fun, it's mommy and daddy that gives permission over that. Every time that there's a good meal there, it's because dad has bought that good meal. Everything in their life has been orchestrated by their father and mother here, so they know that if they want to have joy, not just in that moment, but they want to have joy all around them, then it's also going to come from their father. And for you and I as well, we might say, you know what, I want joy, but how do we find that? We draw into the joy giver. Because you and I, we can't manufacture this ourselves. It has to be a gift from our Father. And so this year, if you want to find joy, draw close to the only one who can give you joy, the one who came out of the grave. With every head bowed, every eye closed.